will go to the next presenter of today, which is Miss Keren Levin. She's from New York, USA, and she's a member of our IWRI Children's Education Department. Her presentation will be about Dewey-Inspired Education in the Coronavirus Era, Perspectives from Within a Fun, Socially Oriented Virtual School Experiment. Well, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Inger, and thank you to all the speakers so far. I've really enjoyed it, and I'll get right to it. This paper that I submitted a few months ago to the conference is a sort of a preparatory paper to a longer work I'm developing over the next half year, where I've begun to examine some of the innovative educational developments that took place in the IWRI Institute in our department in childhood education. And I've begun this examination based on the philosophy of John Dewey. And there are several reasons for that. Well, first of all, I really like John Dewey. I think he's very close to integral methodology. And also he is really the philosopher of education from the 20th century. He was one of the most influential philosophers of education, particularly in the United States, and he continues to be. I actually picked up his books right before the coronavirus started, when libraries were still open, which is not the case anymore. So I could just show you, he was a very prolific writer. So this is the books on which this work is based on. I think I'll have about 5 minutes to summarize the main points I took from those in this work. And then I will try to show how, his philosophy, and particularly his metaphysics, can be maybe extended or interpreted through this new experimentation of children's education in virtual reality. Okay, let me start my presentation. Okay. Just a second. Okay, present. Oops. Present. Okay, so I hope everyone can see that. So I'm just going to start with a quote from School and Society, which he wrote in 1900. The obvious fact is that our social life has undergone a thorough and radical change. If our education is to have any meaning for life, it must pass through an equally complete transformation. Now, he wrote this over a century ago, referring to the great social changes that were happening with the Industrial Revolution. And I think now, I think Dewey's philosophy is very universal, and the same kind of words could be applied today. There's great social changes happening now, particularly in this time of coronavirus. Really many changes going on, especially in society and education. So here he's kind of saying that when there are such great social changes, the education must completely transform, if it is to have any meaning for life. So, oh wait, how do I? Okay, there we go. So the title of this paper, which I was working on a few months ago, is Dewey-Inspired Education in the Coronavirus Era, Perspectives from Within a Fun, Socially Oriented Virtual School Experiment. And if we have time, I'll get into sort of the next stage, that kind of following Dewey, that I've begun to do some work with Schopenhauer, which I think extends the thinking started here. So the kind of working title now is Mapping Social Virtual Education on Dewey's and Schopenhauer's Metaphysics. I don't know if we'll have time to get into Schopenhauer. If the moderator could please give me like a 5-minute notice, so I'll know how far to go into this. So I'll just talk briefly about Dewey's metaphysics and views on education. Then I'll get a little bit into this virtual school experiment that was developed and implemented in IWRI and since then also continued by some partners and colleagues of IWRI, and then tried to make some connections with how this experiment is illuminated by Dewey's philosophy. And in doing that, I would like to point out one of Dewey's very interesting concepts. He talks about empirical philosophy when we take some practical experiences or testing, and then we perform a philosophic work with it. That this work of philosophy results in a unique product that can then be reinserted into the practical experience and extend the realization of potentialities. So I hope some of that can be accomplished with this philosophical work. And then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about further questions for consideration regarding whether virtual education entails a loss because we minimize embodied experiences or embodied knowledge, or stated differently, do we advance or regress epistemologically and experientially speaking when we disregard the physical bodies and crude physical experiences? And those questions are explored further with Schopenhauer's metaphysics. So my tentative hypothesis, I'm just going to throw this out, kind of my tentative hypothesis in this work at this stage is that disembodied, socially oriented education in the virtual reality can be a means of coming to know ourselves and reality in senses beyond knowledge or reason. And the children of today are naturally inclined to develop into this dimension. And I hope I'll be able to show how I'm getting to this hypothesis. Okay, so now let me briefly go over Dewey's metaphysics and views on education. In his book, Experience and Nature, as well as other works, he really outlines this idea that conscious experience, or really all human experience, is in and of nature. And let me talk a little bit about that. So the human condition is such that the individual consciousness is always undergoing this experience that is in and of nature. And he really writes about this beautifully. He writes that experience possesses depth and breadth to an indefinitely elastic extent, and that it penetrates into nature and expands without limit through it. He writes that human experience is the only method for penetrating nature's secrets, and that this applies to materialistic experiences, just to aesthetic and moral ones. So, the aesthetic and moral and sort of more disembodied experiences reach as deeply and truly into nature as engagement in materialistic or physical sciences. And also the consciousness that experiences nature being in and of nature, it cannot be a distinct or separate entity from nature, because then such experience would be impossible. So the consciousness is embedded into nature and undergoes a process of continuous discovery as it expands throughout nature. Now, all of these ideas are laid out in his work, Experience and Nature. And then furthermore, he makes a really interesting statement throughout many of his works. He says, all experience is social. So I think that's really interesting, an interesting statement in light of the fact that all experience is in and of nature, that it's also social. He says all experience is social. And he's very prolific about, education and what education should be like. So I think these educational views are informed by his metaphysics. He underlines in many of his works that social and moral learning should be the main focus of education. He's kind of critical of prior education systems and their focus on technical knowledge, and really constantly underlines the need for for social learning experiences, the need to learn through a social environment. And I can just show another quote from the book Democracy in Education. The previous quote was from Moral Principles in Education, and in Democracy in Education, which is a really a major work of his, he writes, all the aims and values which are desirable in education are moral, where moral traits are marks of a person who is a worthy member of society, so that what he gets from living with others balances with what he contributes. So again, he says all the aims and values in education should be moral and social, relating to, this giving and receiving of society, between an individual and society. And then I just want to point out another theme, which he talks about, which is our constraints in interpreting these notions, and being able to know their authentic referential values. Okay, I'm still here. He says that we are constrained by limitations or prejudices when we, talk about these concepts such as nature, experience, social, moral. We're constrained and limited by the education we have received from society so far. So, when we think about the referential values of these words, meaning, when we use these words, what do they refer to? What is kind of the meaning behind these words? We interpret them, based on the education we received from society. He says we could come closer to uncovering their authentic referential values, or we can surpass the prior referential values of these notions, because we have a capacity to delve further and deeper by using reflective and creative philosophical inquiry. So again, inviting us to kind of stretch the limits of how we understand these notions, of what is society, what is nature, what is experience. Okay, so at this point, I want to shift to looking at the educational experiment that took place in IWRI, and then go on to thinking how that correlates to Dewey's philosophy. I'm going to show just for half a minute a video kind of summarizing the educational experiment, so that hopefully to kind of get into that, I hope you'll have sound. Okay.
Hi, wat correct.
Hi, wie geht's?
Hello, how are you?
Hallo.
Good morning.
Morgen. 8 Uhr früh.
8 a.m. The first lesson begins in the virtual school.
Good morning. We have now a history lesson and we will visit a medieval city. Let's go.
60 students from all over Israel, from 1st to 6th grade, take part in the pilot project, each from their home, on their computer. They are all together as avatars in the virtual school. For several hours a day, core subjects such as English, math, and history are taught in different 3D worlds.
In a virtual space.
Okay, so just that was just to give like a visual of what this experiment looked like. And so as we could see, it took place in this virtual reality. The children and the teachers arrived in their virtual classrooms. Their physical bodies were sitting in their rooms, separated by large physical distances. Some of these people were even located half the globe apart from each other. And they interacted through their avatars in a classroom. Then they went outside of the classroom to a campus, to a forest. And this all took place in this realistic setting in Verbella. Later, they took some of these activities to a more game-like virtual world in Minecraft. Afterwards, they also explored other virtual platforms such as Eureka, which offered sort of other types of experiences. For example, what we saw learning about medieval times by walking around this medieval street and castle in this virtual world, or they had a lesson about marine life, and then they swam underwater in this virtual world, observing, jellyfish and other animals that they were learning about. Now, in the course of these experiences, the participants, the children and the teachers engaged in a shared real life experience. So although everything was virtual, including the avatars through which they experienced these activities together, instead of through physical bodies, they really had real social experiences. And these were experienced by real people, or I guess their consciousness that was present in this virtual world, rather than, wherever they were physically located. So just as an example, one of the children in this virtual world of Verbella, she wasn't able to get to her classroom when it was time for class. She got lost in this virtual campus, and she became really scared, and she felt really lost. And she asked, the adults not to leave her alone. And at the same time, she really was safe in her home, but she was more fully participating in this shared virtual reality. So her consciousness was inhabiting this shared, very real space together with her friends and teachers. And after the experiment, when the children were asked, what struck them most about this experience, what they enjoyed most, almost all of them responded that the best part was being together with their friends there. So this experience of being together in this virtual world was quintessentially social. The physical dimension of experience was muted, and pretty much all that was left in this virtual school was the social or moral dimension supported by this virtual setting. So kind of getting a feel for this experience and returning to Dewey for a moment to try to map this experience onto his metaphysics. I want to cite another quote from his book, Democracy in Education. And this quote is kind of the culminating, like on the last few pages of the book, after he's talks a lot about, in that particular book, about, the meaning of democracy and social, the social order that he thinks is ideal. So this book kind of culminates in this statement, which I really like this quote. So he goes, "What one gets and gives as a human being, a being with desires, emotions, and ideas, is not external possessions, but a widening and deepening of conscious life, a more intense, disciplined, and expanding realization of meanings. What he materially receives and gives is at most opportunities and means for the evolution of conscious life." I would love to hear maybe others' thoughts and kind of responses to this, but the outcome that sort of I was getting from mapping this virtual setting and kind of delving into Dewey is that the virtual setting provides a means to engage in real interactions while annulling the physical or material experience. And again, referring back to this quote, he says the material or physical experience is at most opportunities and means for the evolution of conscious life and realization of meaning. So I think this virtual setting frees us to engage more fully in the internal realm of meaning and expanding consciousness. Now, I don't know if we have time to talk a little bit about how this line of thinking is expanded through Schopenhauer. I don't know if I have time to continue. Okay. So the question that sort of arises out of this is, does virtual education entail a loss when we minimize these embodied experiences or embodied knowledge? And this is, I think, the prevalent view today by many teachers, many parents, you know, who see the shift to virtual education as a loss, you know, as something, a regression, and that by not engaging in physical experiences, that the children are losing something. And also from the philosophical kind of point of view, we can ask, are we advancing or regressing epistemologically, meaning in our knowledge or kind of ability to know things, and experientially in the experiences we're having, when we disregard physical bodies and crude physical experiences. And so in exploring this question, which kind of arose after thinking about Dewey, I turned to Schopenhauer and how that might inform us about that question. And again, the moderator, please stop me if I'm out of time, because this is kind of part two of this inquiry. So Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher, and he has this really famous book called The World as Will and Representation, or Idea. So this was a translation from German, and some translators translate this as representation, and some translate it as idea. So those are kind of the same concept as translated to English, where he's really influenced by Kant and Kantian philosophy, and where he says the main kind of thing in existence is this, what he calls will, and it's something Kant calls the thing in itself, and then everything else are representations or ideas of that will. So this is based on Kant's transcendental idealism, which teaches us that all phenomenon, you know, all things in the world, they're representations only and not things by themselves. So Kant calls this the thing in itself. Schopenhauer calls this the will. And Kant says this thing in itself is underlying all phenomena and the whole of nature. And Schopenhauer calls this the will, which is the only real, true, primary metaphysical thing in the world. And everything else are phenomena, which are representations or idea. And he also says that will lies beyond knowledge or reason, that it's metaphysical while knowledge is physical, and depends on faculties of the physical body. And he also says that will is unknowable, yet he does urge us to inquire into discovering what this will is, which I think implies that he's saying that it is knowable, but in a form that's beyond knowledge or reason. And so again, I mentioned this in the beginning of my presentation. My tentative hypothesis right now is that, from looking at the virtual education, is that disembodied and socially oriented education in the virtual reality can be a means of coming to know ourselves and reality in senses beyond knowledge or reason, and that children of today are naturally inclined to develop into this dimension. And I think also importantly, this metaphysics that the world is my idea, like right, ideas sort of projected by the will, it doesn't deny the physical reality, but it just informs us that the material reality does not exist irrespective of the perceiver. So the two are compatible. Empirical reality, right, as studied by the physical sciences, and transcendental ideality, they are compatible. And Schopenhauer talks about this concept of the world being only a dream. He refers to Plato that talked about this, the Vedas and Puranas, kind of Indian philosophy. We know also Jewish sources say the same thing. And so this sort of physical reality is construed sort of as a dream, as almost not having an existence in itself, but that there is an inner nature of the world that is distinct from the idea. And he's urging us to explore, whether the world is something else. It's more than an idea or more than this phenomenological dream. And he talks about the role of the physical body in all of this, which is our topic of inquiry at the moment, sort of what happens, right, when we start to perceive, when we minimize the role of the physical body. So Schopenhauer does say that the physical body is also an idea generated by the will, but it has a unique role, a unique place. It's an idea through which we perceive other ideas. So the physical faculties of the body determine how we perceive or generate these other ideas. And he writes that the body is nothing but objectified will, will that becomes idea, or the objectivity of will. And I'm suggesting that in kind of moving to the virtual space, we de-objectify the will. And my kind of suggestion at this point is that when we inhabit this virtual world, we change our use of and relationship with the physical body, which leads us closer to knowing the will, which again, the will is sort of unknowable. It's beyond reason or knowledge. And that might become possible if we annul the body completely. And I am suggesting that children today are inclined to this naturally, as they are just drawn to these virtual worlds much more than the physical world. And again, that concludes my presentation. Again, this is all kind of preliminary thinking, and I will kind of be working on this over the next half a year. So if we have another conference, I hope I'll have kind of more definitive insights into this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keren. We do have some questions, or at least one. When developing a virtual study where their children will lose their communication skills in real life, they may start thinking like in a game, and the level of knowledge that will be with such training. I guess it's a reflection, really not a question per se. When developing a virtual study where their children will lose, I guess if the children will lose their communication skills in real life, if they start thinking, it's a game, how would you address that?
Thank you. Yes, so I think that again reflects sort of the fear and hesitation of many parents and teachers to, to spend so much time, of children's education in the virtual reality. And I think the fact of this, of what's happening now, it leaves us no choice. I mean, we are in this virtual reality. I mean, I know at least here in New York, the virus is just going up. I mean, but in terms of losing the social and communication skills, I think this is exactly why it's so crucial to focus on the social and communicative aspect of education, even virtually, that, education should, while imparting, technical knowledge in different fields, it has to really focus on the social aspect of education and communication. And I think there's no problem that it's virtual, because I think the virtual, whatever is learned virtually in the social sphere does translate into the physical interactions as well. But it is very important to make, a special emphasis on social interactions of communication. And I think the fact that it's a game, I think children are always in a game. The minute you leave them alone and don't force them to do what you want, they're playing, they're imagining. And so I don't think that's negative. Yeah, thank you. I hope that answered.
Thank you so much, Keren. I don't see any other questions right now, but we will hopefully have time at the end of the session today to address other questions that we have not been able to get to.